podcast where we talk to smart people, but not necessarily done by smart people?
That is an awesome question.
This one goes down probably on one of my top 5.
Hey, I like nutrition. I like to eat food.
This is the coolest thing ever. We're going to do this forever.
I wish I paid more attention in that class.
You know, I'm going to be honest, I don't understand that. As a man, I don't get it.
Welcome to smartpeoplepodcast.com.
Hello and welcome to Smart People Podcast, conversations that satisfy your curious mind. Chris Stemp here. Thanks so much for joining us today, and really excited to bring you this episode. It's a unique story we're telling here today, as always. We have on the show Jeff Gramm, and Jeff is the author of the brand new book, Dear Chairman, Boardroom Battles and the Rise of Shareholder Activism. So in essence, you may or may not be aware of what goes on behind the scenes of a publicly traded company. So you have these shareholders, so really anybody who owns stock in the company. And then, of course, you have the executives. Well, there's this tension between the two of who actually runs the company. Is it the people that own it, right, these shareholders, or is it technically the people that are in the day-to-day of the company? But here's the thing. As interesting as that is, and as much as, we do cover that in this episode, here's what makes this book and Jeff so interesting. So what Jeff did is he mixed never-before-published original letters from Wall Street icons, such as Benjamin Gramm, Warren Buffett, Ross Perot, Carl Icahn, and he shows what these letters show us about shareholder activism. It's kind of complicated, it's kind of weird, but that's what we do here, try to open it up to new things. So I'm really going to let Jeff do the explaining here. By the way, Jeff is a brilliant guy. Not only is he the author of this book, but he's also a hedge fund manager and an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. He's spent a ton of times evaluating CEOs and directors as he's trying to understand and value businesses, right? So he talks about how you need to understand the executive team and the board and all these people to truly know the value of a business. So before we get into the interview, don't forget, we are launching Smart People Mastermind. Okay, that is happening on March 24th. We have the guests lined up. John and I are working on both the webinar sign up and the website that'll explain everything that comes with this mastermind. But to be sure that you get the link, because it will be limited in scope this first time, we want to make sure we can handle it and all that. So we will have a finite number of spots in this. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter at smartpeoplepodcast.com, and we will be sending out that link this week to reserve your spot. More details to come, but this is one you are not going to want to miss. The person that's putting on this webinar has been on the show before and was also featured in our Best of 2015 episodes. So you know this person's great. First people to hear about it will be those through the email newsletter this week. So again, find us at smartpeoplepodcast.com, sign up for that. But most importantly, hope you can join us on this first webinar, which is only a few weeks away. Please feel free to reach out to us specifically on Twitter at smartpeoplepod. We love that. Here it is, an interview with Jeff Gramm as we discuss his book, Dear Chairman. All right, Jeff. Well, first, want to say thanks so much for having you on the show. Really excited to get into this, a kind of a charged topic. And you have an interesting twist as a teaser. There's some letters we're going to be talking about. I'll probably talk about it in the intro. But first, just want to say thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So let's go back to the beginning. When you were born. No, I'm just kidding. Tell us a little bit about your background. You have, some interesting things. I know you, hedge fund manager, a little bit of a professor kind of thing you got going on at Columbia. Not a bad school. Tell us about your background.
Sure. So I teach investing at the Columbia Business School. I'm a hedge fund manager. I run a little fund called Bandera Partners that it's our 10th year now. And we do, kind of a value investing strategy. I went to business school, which is how I got into investing. And then before business school, I lived in D.C. I played music, actually, and on the side I temped. So that's my an illustrious background.
Wow. So you go from temp to hedge fund manager professor.
Well, when you're applying to business school, like you kind of play up the music angle. So I played in a band. Like we were actually on a label in your neck of the woods, Teen Beat Records. That was a Northern Virginia label.
Okay.
And so I did that pretty much for like through college. Like I graduated college in '96, and then I went to business school in '03.
Okay. You said something interesting there. You said you play up the music aspect when you're applying for business school. That sounds odd. I would say you play down.
You have to have some kind of a professional experience.
Ah.
So that's kind of a more interesting professional experience than, like I had a temp job at the Grocery Manufacturers Association in Georgetown, and I, will stuff, 65,000 envelopes.
Yeah. Oh,
So-
that's pretty great. All right, so let's get into, you went to business school, you come out, because here's the thing, myself included, finance nerd to some degree. I wanted to go work on Wall Street. That was my thing. Everybody who listens to the show knows that, but I don't like New York City. So I was like, that's out. So I got into commercial real estate lending, did that for a while, made some money, got burned out, realized I don't like what's going on. But I have a strong place in my heart for finance, and many people, hedge fund, when I'm putting parentheses around it or quotes around it, think like, oh, it's really, you're making tons of money. It's the business rock star. So what do you think about that?
Well, I definitely, I see that at Columbia. Like it seems to be a very desirable job right now. There's a lot of kids that, that they want to go, get a job at a hedge fund. I actually did this, I kind of led a group of undergraduates at Brown that were doing independent study, and they were interested in value investing, and they contacted me, and it kind of blew my mind that there's like these undergrads at Brown that were interested in finance and investing. So it definitely has captivated a lot of young people. I don't know. Look, it's a great job. Investing in companies is fun. So, like, I can't, I don't blame them. Is it a good thing for society? I don't know, but it's hard to blame them, like, for wanting this job.
So, you brought something interesting up. You said, is it a good thing for society? I don't know, but I can't blame them. And I completely agree with you on that. I was drawn to the allure of, I like gambling, not saying that what you do is gambling, but it's kind of feels like it, at least from what I knew. But there's a lot of money. But the societal benefits, you can make the argument. How do you feel, given that you manage a hedge fund? So we're kind of skipping the lower rungs, we're going to the top, about the legacy, if you will, of running a hedge fund?
Well, what I do is I look at public companies. I try to understand the business. I figure out if I think it's undervalued, which they often aren't, but occasionally you'll find one. And then I'll buy the common stock. And later, usually a lot later, if the common stock gets to fair value, I'll sell it. So every year at the beginning of my class, like the students will ask about, you're doing this good thing because you are financing these companies, and that's not really true. Like I rarely do direct financings. So basically, I'm buying in and out of public companies. I'm not contributing to the kind of success of those companies often. Mm-hmm. So, I tell my students, they always ask, don't you think that, that you're doing a lot of good here? That's the thing that they're interested in, to their credit. When I was in business school, no one cared about that. And I do tell them, well, look, if your goal is to kind of, to do good, this is probably not the best career choice, in terms of directly benefiting society. Like perhaps if you get rich and become a philanthropist, then sure, but that's not the direct path.
What's interesting is,
almost seeing. I'm chuckling a little bit because most people don't associate anything to do with investing, finance, Wall Street with doing good right now. So to have students who are like, "Are you doing good stuff?" That sounds weird to me. I would imagine they go in and be like, "Is it slimy?"
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you would be surprised at people's capacity to rationalize their professional choice as a societal good, A, and B, to their credit, that's at least a thing that these kids are focused on.
Sure.
So at least if they're asking those questions, I give them credit for that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wasn't really asking that question when I was in business school 13 years ago.
Right. No, I love that. I mean, I think it's the millennial generation, if you will. It's one of the things that's starting to come out more and more is something they're doing. What was your motivation for, was this something you wanted to do? Were you like, I want to basically run a hedge fund or invest or,
No, I basically had no clue what to do. Like, I really enjoyed being in a band and I really love music. And I knew that business school was kind of a degree that gave you lots of options.
Yep.
So I went into business school like without a clear idea of what I wanted to do afterwards, and then I just got lucky. I took this class by this professor Joel Greenblatt, who's a hedge fund manager, and he had written this book called "You Can Be a Stock Market Genius," which is a little bit of a goofy title, but it's become a cult classic among hedge fund managers, and it was a value investing class, and it just kind of all clicked with me, and like the idea of looking in the market for a 50-cent dollar, it totally resonated with me in this way that nothing else at business school did. I didn't particularly feel like I fit in there, and then all of a sudden there's like this class that I kind of excelled in, and so from there I just got extremely interested in investing. I mean, I had never heard of Warren Buffett until I got to business school.
Wow.
And so then I just began to read everything I could. I got an unpaid internship at a hedge fund in the summer after my first business school year, and then I went to work for that hedge fund.
You know what? I think this is a good place to pause for a second and really clarify or define hedge fund. Could you do that for us?
Yeah, well, it's like a vestigial term. The term, people think it was coined by Carol Loomis, the Fortune journalist, as she described a fund run by A.W. Jones in the 60s that was called a hedged fund because they were long and short equal parts of their portfolio. So they basically or supposedly had no net exposure to the market, and so they're long a bunch of stocks and they're short a bunch of stocks, and so they're hedged from the market risk. Nowadays, the word hedge fund is essentially a blanket term that describes, kind of a legal structure and a partnership structure and a compensation structure. So now when the term is used, it pretty much means an investment partnership where the fund managers charge a percentage of their winnings. So in our fund, we take a small management fee, but then if we have profits, then we take 20% of those profits. And that's, basically what a hedge fund is. And so there's all kinds of strategies, that can have that structure. It can be a bond investor, a bankruptcy investor, a stock investor, an actual traditional hedged fund in the long short sense. It can be a real estate fund. There's all kinds of hedge funds now.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned that because, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of it, but definitely the hedge aspect always played a part in my mind. Like I was going to ask, so if you're long a stock, are you short the, index it's on, or I don't know, any type of hedging, but really you're kind of an investment fund.
Yeah, exactly. An investment partnership. And
Gotcha.
there are lots of hedge funds that do hedge, but there are some that don't hedge at all. But like the fund like that Buffett ran in the 50s, would today be called a hedge fund.
Gotcha. You know, it's interesting as you were talking about management fees and all that. I just watched the 2-part documentary series on Bernie Madoff. Did you?
Oh, really?
Did you watch that at all?
Oh, no, I haven't seen it.
It was fascinating. It was just on, I think, last week.
Yeah, I got to see.
It really went through. I thought it was. I mean, you know, I know a decent amount about the story because I was interested in it. But man, it goes through everything that happened and it clarified a lot of things. Anyways, really fascinating. And then afterwards, they talk about. They have people from the SEC saying they are currently investigating something like. Tens of billions of dollars in Ponzi schemes. So
Yeah,
it's still happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the financial industry is a weird industry, and marketing works in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell a good story, it works, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's like the dirty side of Wall Street and finance.
Oh yeah, and I've had tons of finance people on, and they're like, "Look, there's a dirty side of almost everything," and I'm the first to say that's true. So
Yeah.
I mean, you know, in DC,
It's quite dirty.
yeah, that's very true. I want to talk about, so you have this investment fund. How do you get to the point where people are like, I think you and or the structure you have created, the people around you are smart enough to invest my money to take a fee for it regardless of the results, and you know, to put it into the market with speculation or whatever. How do you get to that point? Like, you know, as a hedge fund manager, I'm so interested in what you do that other people give you their money, how did it start, and how do you move up and all that?
I think that you'd be surprised at how many people are out there with a lot of capital that are trying to find, young hedge fund managers. You know, I think a dilemma that my fund faces is that, you know, we're 10 years old now, and we're no longer, you know, a fresh, unproven, you know, meat.
Wow.
So, you know, so I think if, like, you know, it's a weird industry. It's a maturing industry, and so now, you know, a pedigree, you know, actually matters now more than ever, which is, like, obviously I think a bad thing, but like if you come out of a well-respected shop, like if you were like an analyst at a big hedge fund, and you know, what's the expression, you know, hang your shingle up or whatever it's called, you're going to get a lot of meetings, and if you tell a good story, then you'll probably get some capital. And to your question of how are you different than anyone else? I mean, I think that's a great question. Like, I think, you know, that everyone likes to talk about their process and their edge, but a lot of investing is about, you know, using your judgment. So how do you prove that you have an edge over other people? Like, A, you kind of can't, and B, you probably don't. I mean, like, you can't, you know, really prove that you're better than everyone else that's out there doing the exact same thing. So...
But actually, on that point, you know, when you talk about, I appreciate the honesty, because I have been in an industry, so I do coaching on and off depending on how busy I am, but career counseling and coaching and life coaching, business coaching. And one of the things I struggled with at first is, why me? You know, why come to me? I'm good, but a lot of people are good, and there's people with more experience. And I did some work through that. I worked with other coaches, and really there's a couple of answers. One, it's your personal style. Two, there's 7 billion people on earth. There just needs to be more, you know, say hedge fund managers, because it's not like we're all going to go to call it a Warren Buffett or whatever, you know? So, and we are tribal people. So if you have your people that you know and they trust you, then they come to you. And it was a light switch moment, and I use it almost as a message to others, which is, you know, you don't always have to think, well, there's someone else out there doing it, or are they doing it better? It's, can you do it and make it work and be of value to people? Then who cares how many other people are out there doing it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think also there's like an element of life where, like, you kind of have to have, like, the chutzpah to not ask that why me question too much, because if you think about it too hard, then it's going to be unpleasant. And, like this book I wrote on shareholder activism, I mean, I'm not like a corporate lawyer. I'm not like a full-time shareholder activist. Like in many ways, I'm not like the perfect, person to have written this book. But yet I kind of think I wrote like a really good book on the topic. And I think it's a good thing that I didn't, focus too much on like, well, why me? Another person should write this book.
Pardon me if this sounds a little presumptuous, but you seem extremely authentic for somebody who works at investing.
Oh, really?
Am I right about that? I mean, would you? It just.
I feel like I know this kind of whole crew of like-minded hedge fund people that are authentic, and I think that they're good investors, and I think that they're doing things the right way. So I mean, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of good folks in the hedge fund space. It's not kind of all, asset gathering, sleaze bags.
Yeah, and again, that's just a bias that I'm I'm talking through and walking through. And I want to, last thing on this topic is, because it's very important, the idea of you saying you shouldn't ask that question, why me, so often. How do you think you have dealt with that in terms of, I'm going to handle I'm assuming a lot of money, or I'm going to write this book specifically that we're going to talk about. How do you deal with not asking yourself that question too many times and just putting your art, whether it be music or writing or investing, into the world?
Well, I mean, I think investing is very humbling, and you make a lot of mistakes, and making mistakes is a part of the trade. And so I think like you have to have like the humility to make it work, because if you're too confident in your opinions, then it can really burn you. What we do is concentrated investing. So we'll buy 20% of our portfolio into one position, and
oh wow,
if you're too cocky, or if you just get attached to that position, that's just like a recipe for disaster. So I mean, I think it's just like you're trying like to minimize your mistakes. Like I think of it like, if you ever watch like a junior high softball game or baseball game, it's like the team that makes the fewest mistakes like wins. Like it's not about the great plays. It's about just, not doing the dumb mistakes. I kind of think about investing that way. Like you just like, you have to use your judgment. Like you have to stay rational, and you have to try not to do, dumb shit that everyone else does.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, because it actually goes all the way through to the professional, level. If you look at the Super Bowl, I mean, you could say that a couple of fumbles, so mistakes on Carolina, plus maybe a different call by the refs on the catch, these being mistakes, changed the face of the championship. So, anyways.
Well, I think the best example is the NCAA men's basketball tournament. And especially like as the quality of college basketball has declined, that's all about like who screws up the least in crunch time.
It's a good point. Plus the really good players just skip college altogether and go straight to the NBA, straight to the big leagues. Well, while we're transitioning a little bit, let's talk about investing in general. You talk about in your book, I mean, a number of things. And again, we'll list the name of the book and we'll talk about it. It's called Dear Chairman. But you talk about shareholder activism. You talk about, the boardroom battles that go on. What do you look for in companies? Because you're not the average investor that goes, I did my spreadsheet analysis and I bought some stocks. I'm sure you're going, meeting with them, sitting down, really digging in. What are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that you look for is a dependable business that you can understand, like that has a little bit of, predictability into the future. And then like you're, trying to figure out if you can put a value on it. So you put a value on a business by kind of estimating the cash flow that you're going to get in the future and discounting it back to the present. And so if you can do that, then that's a starting point. If the stock is valued way below what you think it's inherently worth, then you should begin to think about why. Is it the management? Is it, bad governance? Is it just that, like, the market, does not understand the prospects of the business? So it's all stuff like that. And that's like, to be clear, that's the value investing I do. There's a lot of ways, to succeed in the markets. So, that's the kind of investing I do. And a lot of it is kind of evaluating the board and the management, because even if you are a shareholder in a very good company that generates like a lot of cash, they have to use the cash that they generate in a wise fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a kind of the source of a lot of conflict between investors and public companies, like they, kind of gave birth to activism as we know it.
Mm.
And so that's like a key part of the equation too.
One of the things I think about, especially as we're talking about shareholder activism being, people who own parts of the company really pushing their agenda or opinions on the people running the company. Mm-hmm. I think a lot about what happens to a company once it goes from private to public. I've had the fortune to work at kind of two companies and see that transition. Neither time have I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It becomes all about quarterly improvements, which I think really bring down the value that a company can deliver in the long run. How do you feel about that?
I mean, in some ways, I might feel like the debate over a short-termism is overstated, and like that there are lots of companies out there that think for the long term. Like when you look at Amazon, they clearly have a long-term plan to take over the world.
I love it, but he straight up came out and said, if you're looking for short term, just don't even come here."
Yeah, and when he wrote to shareholders in '97, like he laid out the plan. But yeah, like you're right. Like if you're a public company, then you announce your earnings on a quarterly schedule, and they're public, and it's just like human nature. I mean, it's easy to blame the shareholders, but I think that like we all just have kind of a short-term bias, and like we all would prefer to not have 2 or 3 bad years before the good years come.
Mm-hmm.
And being a public company enhances the kind of scrutiny that causes that.
Sure. But maybe on this, on that same token, it forces them into more action and less planning, which at the end of the day does create growth and movement, as opposed to really overthinking every strategy. You have to, hey, we got to deliver because we have our earnings announcement coming up. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the business. It depends on the management. It depends on kind of their relationship with the shareholders and who the shareholders are. I mean, public companies are weird things, right? Like you have the shareholders who supposedly elect a board of directors who choose the management. In reality, that's not quite, how it actually works. Right. Usually the managers choose the board, and the board is accountable to shareholders if the shareholders are paying attention. And so it's kind of like a messy and inefficient stew, to mix my metaphors. And what a lot of these activists are doing are they're trying to hold the boards accountable.
Yeah.
And that can be bad and good if the activists have bad ideas. But I think in general, like having an engaged board like that knows that the shareholders can vote them out if they're upset is ultimately a good thing.
Right. So let's get into that. Again, the book is Dear Chairman, Boardroom Battles and the Rise of Shareholder Activism. Why write about shareholder activism?
I mean, I do think it's an interesting topic, and it kind of allows me to tell a history of public companies and business in a fun way. Like the way that I structure the book is through case studies. I took 8 case studies. The first is in the 1920s, and they go through the mid-2000s, and each of them profiles a particular intervention. But to your question of, of how come I wrote this book, I mean, it's always, been a thing that fascinates me. I came into this industry in the early 2000s when there was this particular breed of shareholder activism that was based on trying to shame the CEO. So like you would have these extremely angry, public letters that would kind of like insult the CEOs, a mother or something like that. And I came of age in that era, and so I just like began to collect a bunch of these letters. And so the book, kind of came out of my collection of letters.
Let's talk about those letters, because I know you mix in some really what caught my eye right off the bat, people like Benjamin Gramm, Warren Buffett, Ross Perot, Carl Icahn, right? Many people know there. Mm-hmm. First, let's try and see, did you pull anything out of these big names, right? Did they have a similar tone or objective? Were they very argumentative and trying to control, or were they just advisory? Anything that you pulled out there?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the situation. So in the Ross Perot one, he had sold his company to GM in the 80s, when GM was among the biggest companies in the world. And they put him on the board, and he quickly figured out, oh man, this is a really poorly run company, and they're taking the wrong direction. And so him being Ross Perot, he's a brutally direct person. He wrote this quite angry, 4-page letter to Roger Smith, the CEO, kind of calling out the way that Smith acted as a CEO, the long-term strategy, the flaws with the company. It was incredibly harsh. The Benjamin Gramm letter was he was a shareholder in a company that was essentially controlled by the Rockefellers. So he kind of had to write as a supplicant, trying to persuade them to pursue a particular corporate action. And so it depends on the nature of the case study. And in the Buffett one, that's a letter that he wrote to American Express in 1964. He was actually defending the CEO against shareholder activists, trying to support the company and offering to testify on its behalf.
Whenever I think about Warren Buffett, I had the chance to interview his son, Peter, and I did some research on Buffett. He was always an icon for me, and I'm wondering if in your book, in your letters that you read, in studying him, if you ever came across this, which is a lot of people see Warren Buffett as just a brilliant investor, and I'm not saying he wasn't. But I did find out or research that oftentimes because of his strength, he could basically strong arm a lot of aspects of a company, which almost seems like the definition of shareholder activism.
Yeah, well, in his early days in the 50s, he would often, buy controlling stakes, replace the board, force the board to pay a cash distribution. He did a lot of things that you would call classic shareholder activism. And I talk about that in the book in the context of this investment that he made in American Express in the mid-'60s. And in American Express, he came out on the other side. There's these activists involved in the company that are trying to compel the company to do something that Buffett thinks will hurt the company, and he decides to intervene on behalf of management. And it's a real turning point in his career because he begins to focus more on high quality businesses with long-term sustainable growth, as opposed to these what he called cigar butts, which he invested in the 50s and early 60s, where he would say you could get the cigar butt off the ground for nothing and get a few free puffs. And actually Berkshire Hathaway was a textile company in Massachusetts. It was a terrible business that was very much a cigar butt. And so that was an example of the kind of investing that he was doing before American Express.
Wow. So you've had the chance to see the good and the bad of shareholder investing, both personally through your investing and then also through this book and through the letters. When did you see a great example of shareholders really turning a company around or voicing their opinions in a way that truly benefited the company itself, although perhaps not management?
Well, I mean, the best example would be Berkshire Hathaway, right? That's like, it was a dying, a textile company that like was on a straight path to insolvency and irrelevance. And now it has, 350,000 employees and is like among the biggest companies in the world. And that's, kind of all been through Buffett's asset allocation.
They don't do textiles still, do they?
Don't they own Fruit of the Loom? I guess that's textiles.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see. So, okay. So under their umbrella.
But, yeah, it's not a material part of their business.
I was like, that'd be interesting. Now, what's the flip side of this? You talked about people. I mean, is it people just having too much of a voice if they own some of the company?
I think the flip side is that if you're kind of a passive shareholder, like you have to to understand that a lot of these activists that that get involved, they're they're out to make a profit for themselves, right? It's like they are economic actors, with trying to make a buck, and so as a shareholder, you have to choose between a management team that might be self-interested, like that might not have your best interests in mind, or this financial investor that also might not have your best interests in mind. And so there have been bad cases of activism. There have been cases of shareholder activists that take over public companies and then overpay themselves or do questionable things with the cash flows. There's a case in my book, the case of BKF Capital, that was actually a bunch of activists got involved and essentially destroyed the company. In 18 months, the stock essentially went to zero.
Wow.
And so it can go wrong. Like, you have to use your judgment as a voting shareholder. And that's, kind of the point of my book is it's not very prescriptive. I'm not trying to kind of, tell you activism is bad or activism is good. It's just, trying to give you the tools to think about it properly, to understand how it works and to kind of improve your judgment.
How does activism from a shareholder perspective affect the average person? Because, well, first, I guess, how do you end up becoming a shareholder that has a voice? You can't just buy one share. I mean, you are then a shareholder, but you don't have a voice. So what does it mean to actually have a voice? How much do you have to own, per se? And then, assuming most people aren't that, how does it translate to the average person?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things. I mean, well, first of all, I mean, every share has a vote. So, you do get votes, and, sometimes these, the board elections are close. But the other thing is, a lot of us do have our, retirement savings or savings invested in big institutions that are active investors. If you're a teacher in California, CalSTRS, the entity that invests the teacher pension plans, is a very progressive activist investor, and so in that sense, we all have a stake in the future of good governance. And then the broader issue is, I mean, obviously, corporate behavior affects the world, right? It affects the world that we live in profound ways. And especially now, as these, corporations are bigger and, more intricate and more, intertwined in our lives, bad corporate behavior can have extremely bad effects. I mean, if you look at AIG, they almost, brought down the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does affect everyone. And I think, the kind of practical effect of pervasive activism is it does kind of us, it makes our capitalist corporations, more capitalist. It takes out the inefficiencies that are kind of that build up between the CEO and the board and the shareholders. And I think there are people that would probably argue that those inefficiencies, like, at least put a damper, like, on capitalism, doing its worst.
Yeah.
So there are situations. I mean, there is a classic example in the 80s. There is a corporate raider who took control of Pacific Lumber, which had all of this, like, old growth West Coast, redwood forests, and the guy got control and basically clear cut it all, in a sustainable way. And is that a shortcoming of activism, or is that like a shortcoming of capitalism? I would argue it's kind of the latter.
Yeah, for sure.
But
I mean, that's what I
activism
think.
can kind of can grease the wheels of these big corporations to kind of act as they would, in a purely capitalistic fashion.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Because if you think about it, as an investor, even if you aren't an investor, but more so if you have your money in somewhere, today more than ever, you can become an activist, right? If you have a following. If I wanted to really bash a company, which I have thought about, by the way,
Yeah.
I could hammer it in over and over and over again on the podcast, not saying, that 10, 20,000 people is going to make the biggest difference in the world, but maybe it gets coverage and now it's in the media and now the media needs stories, so they run with it, and one little person's voice could make a difference, hence shareholder activism.
Yeah, and there are like some organizations like PETA, like, that has tried that through the public shareholder system. And so, like, there are ways, like, to do that. I mean, that's not a focus of the book. I focus, more on the financial investor side.
Right.
But yeah, like, you definitely have it's undeniably true, like, that corporations can do some pretty ridiculous thing. I mean, you have little kids, right?
I do. I have a 10-month-old.
Have you seen this thing? Well, like, if he or she is 10 months, then, like, you might not be a slave to Disney yet.
Not yet.
Like, but once you are, there's this thing on a Disney DVD where it pulls up like a menu, and you can either go to the main menu, or there's a button called Fast Play. And it's like, this is enhanced with Fast Play. You can just click the Fast Play for a Fast Play. So you click Fast Play, and Fast Play is actually takes you to like 20 minutes of advertisements.
What?
Until the movie starts. And it's kind of like who the hell would invent this thing? It's like only like a weird, it's just, like a sign of the evils that can come out of big corporations.
Yeah, it's not serving anyone. Wait, now I'm fascinated though, real quick. Fast play as in, once you get through the ads, is the movie in fast forward?
I think the point of Fast Play is that you click a button and then it just goes.
But that's
it
not
goes
at all what
to like
happens.
25 minutes of ads that you don't want to watch.
Oh my God.
So it's pretty ridiculous.
That is
And that's the world we
shocking.
live in, right?
It is the world we live in, but it is capitalism. That's where, oh gosh, it's, for me, I'm always torn. And in this current political environment too, right? With the debates and everything, you look at, okay, more government versus less government. Well, capitalism works in some instances because, frankly, look, I live right outside of DC. I know tons of friends work for the government. Government can do great things, put somebody on the moon, right? The government can also be extremely wasteful. Extremely. We see it with the VA and the hospitals. But so then you balance, okay, well, corporations can be extremely innovative and they can bootstrap and get great things done, or they can add fast play and 25 minutes of ads to your life.
Yeah, it's a weird thing that the way that I talk about that in the book is the transformation of GM. So like you think about GM in the 20s, through the 50s, it was among the best companies in the world. Like without that company, it's not clear that we would have won World War II. They had a tremendous impact on the war effort.
Right.
And GM in 20 years, they became among the worst companies in the history of the world. And like it's a real fine line between a well-governed company and a poorly governed company.
Yeah.
And so that's, what kind of the point of the book is to kind of explain how fine that line is and how the system works. And in GM, it's a clear example of like how quickly things can go terribly wrong.
I like that summation. That's where we should end it, because you know what? Right there, now I'm buying the book. Because it's one of those things. At first, you kind of think, look, that's beyond arm's reach. Like, I don't know if I'll ever be a shareholder big enough for my voice to matter, But then if it's like, yeah, but corporations, the way they impact our lives, let's understand how management plays a role, and then how the board plays a role, and people invest it. Really, really great stuff. Jeff, thanks so much. I mean, in the time that you've spent on the show, your fund probably just made 7 figures. So, I feel like maybe I played a little role in that.
Thank you, sir. I owe you a beer at some point.
That sounds good to me. The book is Dear Chairman, Boardroom Battles and the Rise of Shareholder Activism. Jeff Gramm, incredible. Thank you. And is there anywhere else? I mean, people interested in investing with you now. What's your fund's name? Or do you write? Are you on social?
Yeah, I do have a Twitter account. I'm trying not to use the book as a marketing.
Okay.
So basically, if you're interested in these ideas, I would suggest the book as opposed to my fund.
Hey, no worries. What's your Twitter handle if you're on there?
It's Jeff Gramm. I'm brand new on that. I don't really know what to do with it, but it's just Jeff Gramm. There's an underscore in there somewhere.
I love it. All right, Jeff. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks a lot. And yeah, I'm sorry about all the cutoffs.
Oh, no worries. That'll take 2 seconds to edit through there. No worries.
Cool.
All right, man. Have a good one.
All right, man. Have a good day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode with Jeff Gramm. Jeff's book, Dear Chairman, Boardroom Battles and the Rise of Shareholder Activism, is available on Amazon and at your local bookstore. If you do decide to purchase through Amazon, please make sure to use the Smart People Podcast Amazon link located at smartpeoplepodcast.com/Amazon. If you're looking for other easy and free ways to support Smart People Podcast, please head over to iTunes and Stitcher. Leave a rating, review, comment over there. It really does help out the show, and we appreciate each and every single one of you that take the time to do so. Make sure you head over to smartpeoplepodcast.com to see all things Smart People Podcast related. Sign up for the newsletter, see upcoming guests, all that good stuff. We've got some great episodes coming up, and we will see you all next week.